Good morning. In the opening chapter of the book of Genesis, we hear the creation narrative, how God created the world. And I want to read the 16th verse in the first chapter of Genesis. It says, God made the two great lights, the sun and the moon, the greater one to govern the day, the sun, and the lesser one, the moon, to govern the night. And he made the stars as well. And he made the stars as well. Sometimes we have to take a moment and realize what is being said in that simple phrase, and he made the stars as well. I love sometimes, especially if you go south of here, so there is no light pollution, you can look up and truly see the stars in the sky. And you can see just the grandeur of what it is, the place in which we live in this universe. So I did some research. I was looking up the numbers. So in the Milky Way galaxy, the galaxy in which we live in, there are 400 billion stars with a B. There are 400 billion stars just like our sun in this planet, or in this universe. In the universe, so there are 200 billion galaxies in our universe. That's ever expanding. We're always learning through the science to find new ones, right? We're learning more and more about this universe, the known universe, about 200 billion galaxies in our universe, which means that there is about 10 sextrillion stars. That's 10 to the 22nd power stars in our universe. And we hear in the gospel, or in Genesis, and he made the stars as well, because for God it's just that easy. It's hard for us to comprehend these numbers. It's hard for us to understand what this truly means. So if we take each of these suns as a grain of sand, just in our universe, the Milky Way galaxy, or in our galaxy, this galaxy that we live in, if we take them as a grain of sand, it would cover 12 football fields worth of sand, just from the stars in our universe. In our galaxy. In our universe, the 10 to the 22nd power, it would cover our globe 22 times. And God made the stars as well. I think it's ironic because I know sometimes in my own life, even though we live in this great, grand universe where we have a God who created all this, and he knows us, as we heard last weekend. He knows every hair on our head. He knows us better than we know ourselves. This God who made this massive universe and everything in it knows and loves you. Oftentimes, I like to replace God with myself and put myself in the center of the universe. In the history of the church, theologians would call this the great sin of pride. Pride being that we put ourselves in the place of God. Pride that I'm going to put myself in the center of the universe. Modern psychologists would call this the ego. And we have somebody from the 20th century, a monk by the name of Thomas Merton. He was down in Kentucky. He wrote, I love this, all sin starts with the assumption that my false self, and he uses false self for pride or for ego, is the fundamental reality of life around which everything in the universe is ordered. Let me read that again. The assumption that my false self is the fundamental reality which everything in the universe is ordered. And so we come from last weekend in the 10th chapter of Matthew of God talking about how important you are. How God, this God of the universe, and he made the stars as well. This God, this all-powerful God knows you, loves you, sent his only son to die for you and for me because he loves us so much. And now this weekend, Jesus is helping us understand, what does it mean to then be a disciple of this God? What does it mean to be a disciple of God instead of putting myself in the center of the universe, but putting God back into that space? And we continue in the 10th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. It says, whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Let me read that again. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Jesus is not talking about our physical death. As we read just last week or 2 weeks ago, Jesus said, don't fear those who can kill the body. Rather, fear those who can kill both body and spirit and send you to Gehenna. Jesus is not talking about the death of our physical self, but what he is talking about is the death of that false self, that death of our ego, that death of our pride. And it's easy sometimes as we sit here in church all comfortable to say, yes, I know I need to do that. We can look back and we can see these moments maybe in which we could have that death to ourselves. That we can be a little bit more humble, that we can put somebody else first, that we can do all these things instead of putting ourselves in the center of this great universe, that we can put God back into the center of it. But then let's be honest, as soon as we walk out these doors, life happens and it gets hard. And so I want to give us 3 very concrete ways to live the gospel message that we heard today throughout this next week. The first way that we die to our false self, that we die to our pride, that we die to our ego, is when we go through change in life, that we don't try to control every aspect. There's one constant that happens in life, and that's life changes, right? Like we're all going through change. Not a single one of us here in this church right now is not going through some sort of change in this very moment. Whether it's life-altering in every aspect, or it can be so small and seemingly insignificant, but we're all going through some sort of change. I know for myself, right? This week, leaving here at St. Mary's and going to St. Matthias, this change is happening. And the temptation is when I'm living in my ego, when I'm living in my false self and my pride, is to try to control it. Either to control it so it doesn't happen, so I push back on it, or I try to control those aspects of it so that way I can be God and manipulate the change. And we're reminded today that doesn't work. I think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The night before he dies, he suffers and dies. He goes to prayer and he says, listen to this, he says, Father, please let this cup pass through me, but not my will, your will be done. Oftentimes our prayer is more like, Jesus, let this cup pass from me at all costs, whatever it takes. I'm not wanting this in any way, shape, or form. And so if we're going to die to ourselves, if we're going to die to our ego, to our false self, to take those words of Jesus, whatever change it is you're going through right now, Father, maybe you don't want this. Father, please take this from me. Please help me. But not my will, your will be done. The second way that we die to our false self, we die to our pride, to our ego, is something I learned from the greatest theologian of all time, the greatest theologian I've ever met, which is my mother. My mom would say, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all. And maybe you've said the same thing to your kids, or you've heard it from your parents. If you have nothing nice to say, bite your tongue. Because one of the greatest sins that we all struggle with, that everybody struggles with, is that sin of gossip. We gossip about everybody. We gossip about coworkers, about neighbors, about friends. We gossip about family members. We gossip about the mother-in-law. We gossip sometimes in a destructive way for sure about our spouse. Because when we're living in that false self, when we're living in our ego and in our pride, we feel insecure. Right? We feel that we don't have it together, that we don't know. We feel that insecurity. And then we believe the lie of the evil one that says, well, if you put this other person down, it's going to make you feel better. If you gossip, if you tell about the failings of this person, it'll make you look like you have it in control. It sounds ugly even saying it, but it's a reality of what it is. But oftentimes we fall into it because we believe the lie. And so in this moment in which we can die to ourselves, that we can die to our ego, we can die to the pride, and put Jesus back at the center, is to bite our tongue. This week is to not gossip, to live out of the freedom that Jesus Christ has given us. And then the third and the final is to put another person before yourself. To put another person before yourself. So if you're married, you stood before the altar, you stood before your family and friends, you stood before God, and you said to the other person in your vows that you love them in the way that Christ loves us. And Christ loves us by giving his life for us, for you. He laid down his life for us. And so love in that way says this, it says, I'm going to put your needs, your wants, and your desires before my own. I'm going to put all those things before myself when you stood here before the altar and before God and your family and friends and said that to your spouse. And at first in the marriage, oftentimes, it's pretty easy, right? You're in the honeymoon phase. You want to make your spouse feel loved. You want to do those things. You get up early to make the coffee. You come home from work and you put away the dishes and you mow the lawn. You do these things because you want to show your love to the other person. But then over time, your heart starts to get hard. You get bitter. You gotten hurt. And then all of a sudden you don't ask yourself, how can I love the other person? But you start asking the question, how are they going to love me? How are they going to love me when I get home from work and I'm going to put my feet up? What are they going to do for me? Which puts us right back at the center of the universe, at the center of our false self, pride and ego, saying, what can I get out of this? And so if you want to die to yourself, if you want to follow Jesus Christ this week, then put your spouse or somebody whom you love before yourself in your life this week. Love them, love your friends, love your spouse, love your children as Christ loved them, laying down your life for them. So we do it in those three ways. I want to just encourage us this week. The first is when change comes, is you take the words of Jesus and say, Father, please let this cup pass, but not my will, your will be done, which enters into surrender. If you have nothing nice to say about that person, about that mother-in-law, about that friend, about that coworker, then bite your tongue. And to allow Jesus into that space. And then third is to love well. That way, the God of the universe, the God who made the 10 to the 22nd power stars, as we hear in Genesis, he just made the stars as well. The God who loves you so much goes back to his rightful place as Christ is King of our lives and of this universe. Can you hear the church say? Amen.